So, welcome everybody. Today's discussion is on a topic resuming from our last week's discussion that about consciousness, different perspectives on consciousness. So, basically, we are trying to see how people are fascinated by this topic of consciousness, how they approach this topic from various perspectives. Like today, also we'll see many perspectives. In the last session, we saw different perspectives. Like if you try to model consciousness or you try to understand consciousness as, let's say, entropy or as an experience or as um, uh, awareness or as so many definitions we saw how people view consciousness as or as a complex emergent property, or as uh, a symptom of life. Like so many different perspectives we saw from in the last session, and in today's session we are trying to um, uh, see different perspectives from means how different people they try to understand consciousness in relation to brain. So, and what is the driver, or what is consciousness in relation to brain? So, uh, first, I will start from last week's slide. So this is we saw this slide in the last week. We saw how many people they argue, many scientists they argue that consciousness could be an emergent property of the system, the brain. So basically, they see consciousness as an emergent property, and the brain is the driver, and brain is trying to seek maximize information exchange or entropy, and and by it is doing so to aid the survival of the brain's bearer, the person who is having the brain, and by allowing them to better model their environment. So this is one understanding which we saw last week, and today we are starting from this understanding, which is basically saying that brain is the driver of everything. Brain is the driver, and consciousness is driven, or consciousness is an emergent property of the brain. This is one view, and then another publication in Nature. It says it. So I will read it out. Consciousness is often described as the mind's subjective experience. So here again, consciousness is secondary, and something else is primary. So, and it says, whereas a basic robot can unconsciously detect conditions such as color, temperature, or sound, consciousness describes the qualitative feeling that is associated with those perceptions, together with the deeper processes of reflection, communication, and thought. So this is by a PhD student in Paris. Um, so this is uh, so basically this view is saying consciousness is a subjective experience of the mind. Basically, it says consciousness is an emergent property, and something else is the driver. So as you can see further in this article, as scientists have become more adept in detecting consciousness, they have begun to determine which brain regions and circuits are most important. But but there is much debate still about what constitutes consciousness in neural terms, which particular disagreement uh, uh, with particular disagreement over which brain processes and regions matter most. So okay, so this is one perspective on consciousness, that consciousness is basically brain has a very complicated circuitry, and this circuitry is giving rise to consciousness. And so what this research is trying to study, that let's say which regions in the brain are responsible for certain kinds of consciousness. For example, um, let's say this is an example image. There are two kinds of brains: a healthy brain and an unhealthy brain. Or the unhealthy brain means the patient is non-responsive to, means externally it is not responsive. It is not the person, the subject is not moving the hands and legs or showing any emotions, but they are just in a kind of non-moving state, just like, for example, because of some injury, their hands and limbs are not moving, but they are just hearing what you are saying. So they were asked to imagine some tasks. Let's say this is a healthy person. When this person was asked to imagine this task of playing tennis, this was the brain activation. Basically, you put lots of electrodes in the brain to see to measure your potential on the scalp or the upper surface of the skull or the head. And then other methods like fMRI scans or something, which basically they try to measure the uh, electronic or magnetic activity in the brain. Basically, you put some magnetic field and see, because a magnetic field can interact with magnetic field. So if brain has some magnetic field, it is interacting with that external magnetic field, and those interactions are captured as some readings. And similarly, the brain has some potential field, and you put some external potential and try to measure the uh, those how that potential changes when you think something. So that is another kind of measurement. It's called EEG. That is another kind of measurement which you do. So basically, okay, what is the goal? The goal is to see what regions of the brain become activated. For example, if some person is thinking of playing tennis, then this region of the brain, it's very consistent that it is also true in intersubject. Basically, you have multiple people thinking about same thing, same portion in the brain will become activated. And similarly, when another task, walking around the home, when you think about this task, similar pattern is formed in the brain. So this is a very exciting research. This is a very exciting finding that how what I am thinking is giving rise to a certain pattern in the electric or magnetic field of the brain, and that uh, pattern is can be recognized by an external device. For example, if you want to read my mind, what I'm thinking, you can do some machine learning. Basically, you can you know the patterns which are formed when I think specific tasks, and then you can uh, read get the readings of the brain, and then uh, detect what I am thinking. So something in that direction. So basically, this is a very interesting finding, that how uh, our uh, brain, it is not just in one person, it is also true in multiple persons. For example, if you see my patterns and somebody else's patterns, the patterns are quite similar. So you can do a lot of machine learning here, and we have done some work in this. So you see how it's very consistent across different people, and even people, somebody is healthy or not healthy. This has been an active area of research in neuroscience, where they try to find out which regions in the brain they become activated, okay, in this way. So okay, so but coming back to our main topic. So what is basically, they're saying that this is like detecting consciousness. If you're conscious of certain task, or if you're consciousness, then certain patterns are emerging in the brain. And so this means that brain gives rise to consciousness. So that is the underlying thread. Okay, now there's another higher or a kind of another perspective, another observation which is important here. The same paper, it says, it has become increasingly clear, however, that consciousness is not confined to only one region of the brain. So okay, so why so? For example, if you are able to detect, okay, consciousness is because of, let us say, coming back to the slide, the thought of playing tennis is confined to a particular region in the brain, but the consciousness as a whole means uh, it is not just confined to one region of the brain, but the entire brain is participating. For example, if you remove this region, then will somebody be able to think about tennis, or will he be conscious at all? So if I remove certain portion, then consciousness is lost, something like that. So it says that consciousness is not confined to only one region of the brain. Various cells and pathways are engaged depending on what is being perceived or the type of perception that is involved. So different brain regions, they are stimulated in different kinds of perceptions, um, uh, but then consciousness is kind of uh, you cannot pinpoint certain region that this is the region which is responsible for consciousness. Okay, so their fundamental philosophy is that yes, brain is responsible for consciousness. If brain is in a particular state, then consciousness emerges. But then uh, but then uh, um, brain is not means now they're trying to find out, okay, what is that region of brain? So as you saw in this line, what constitutes the consciousness in neural terms? What neurons in the brain are responsible for consciousness? What uh, uh, maybe groups of neurons or a part of the brain which is responsible for consciousness, that they're able to find out. So see the kind of how the thought process is. Okay, first brain is responsible for consciousness, but then they're trying to find out which portion of the brain is responsible. They're saying no, it is the entire region, entire brain, which seems to be responsible for emerging consciousness. Okay, let's read it further. So it says now, what is the kind of utility of this research? So every year, tens of thousands of people in US become unconscious while under general anesthesia. So you give anesthesia to some person for operations or some very painful activity, and you give anesthesia, but still the person has not become unconscious. So they cannot move or speak, but they might be able to hear voices or equipment noises and to feel pain. So this is the whole purpose of giving anesthesia is defeated. The person is still able to feel pain. He's not moving or speaking. He's not able to get out or cry out, but he's still feeling the pain. This experience can be traumatic, like you're doing operation and the person is not speaking anything but experiencing all that pain. And this is fraught with ethical and legal ramifications for the doctors who are caring for them. So it's very uh, very traumatic for the patient. Some scientists are working to promote guidelines for communicating with unresponsive patients, as well as looking for signs of discomfort in such people. They are urging the development of improved training and laws to deal with the possibility that alternative ways of detecting consciousness will alter the definition of him. Okay, so basically they're saying that this detecting consciousness is so important, and it has many applications. I'm just showing one application. So a side note on utility, that this understanding, so basically which understanding, that the brain is the driver, or the brain is responsible for consciousness. This model, or this view of the entire uh, experience, this has led to very good developments in modeling the correlations between different activities and brain responses. And uh, okay, this has become very, this is very, uh, uh, it has many good utilities. Few examples could be like this. So detecting what a person is thinking. For example, if you're doing forensics, so you want to see whether somebody is a criminal or not, and you put that equipment on the measuring devices on his head and see what that person is thinking. So that has utility in forensics. You want to find whether somebody is a criminal or not. And then detecting if some person is sleepy, drowsiness detection. So if, let's say, if in the car somebody is driving a car and he's feeling sleepy, so he's losing his consciousness, and then it is a good utility if you know what patterns are formed in the brain, and then you can immediately find out if the driver is getting sleepy, and then you can give a signal or give an alarm or something to wake him up and ask him to go and park your car in the side and have a nap. And then another utility could be treatment of brain injuries, that when somebody has traumatic brain injuries, is not able to perform certain actions, then that part of the brain, okay, playing tennis means this part of the brain is damaged. So you try to do something, try to uh, develop some treatment or some kind of surgery for that part only. So you can focus your treatment in that part. Okay, so this model is one view, but then, okay, let us dig down deep. Is this model complete, or are there some things which it is missing out? So, okay, let us ask this question again. If we go by this model, then what is consciousness? So the same paper says, minimally conscious state in which people show some evidence of awareness of their environment or themselves. So basically they say consciousness is awareness of our environment, of awareness of ourselves, right? And then uh, the conscious experience of fear comes from cognitive awareness and the emotional interpretation of a situation. So this says that consciousness is basically experience of uh, 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 our environment and the experience of our emotional or mental states, just like fear or anger. These are not external observations and external sense experiences, but they are experienced in our mind, in our mental states. So basically, what we take away from this, the definition of consciousness as pursued in this study is consciousness as awareness of our sensual experiences. If I'm experiencing something with my touch, taste, vision, our hearing, or what else? Our uh, touch, taste, and smell, right? So five senses. So these are five information gathering senses. So I get information about the world from these five senses. So consciousness means awareness of our sensual experiences, or it could be also the awareness of our mental states. If I'm angry or happy or sad or fearful. So now the question can be asked in this understanding: where is the lacuna? Where is the what it is not explaining? So okay, the question could be asked: who or what is aware? Okay, you're saying awareness of mental states, awareness of sensual experiences, but this means the person who is aware, or he must be different from sense experiences, or he must be different from mental states, or means these kind of questions are asked by uh, many people. That okay, when you say consciousness is awareness, then who is conscious? Where is consciousness, or what is the seat of consciousness? If it is just some neurons in the brain, then so if you go by that understanding, then let us, okay, this is very kind of difficult to understand question. From this model is having some difficulties, which some questions which it is not able to answer. Okay, let us now look at this question from a different perspective, which comes from the study of neural networks. So the neural networks might help here. So let's see what kind of help. A neural network is also aware. It seems to be. It seems like okay, as we saw in the previous article, the neural network is detecting something, but it is not aware. Okay, we agree with that. Uh, Perspective too. Okay, if you define awareness in that sense, but here you see, whenever you have a stimulus, then the network will uh, give a certain kind of response. The neuronal response is of certain kind. That's what the we saw in the brain also, right? When we somebody wants to play tennis, then certain part of the brain got activated, and it showed activity in the EEG or fMRI studies. And then similarly, our visual experiences, they are giving rise to uh, uh, certain neuronal response in the neural networks, in the uh, artificial neural networks. So, and we can also do regional analysis of neural networks. So this is a paper from Cambridge University. So they are trying to study how the deep neural networks can be stimulated to, let us say, if I this is speech, when the network hears silence, then this region is activated. The dark red shows more activity, or more activation there. This part is more activated in the artificial neural network, not the brain, but the artificial neural network. And similarly, when this sound is heard, then this region is activated in layer 1 and layer 2 of the artificial neural network. So in this way, you can do a study here. Of course, there is one difference here, that our brain has very consistent patterns across people also, but neural networks, as you know, different networks trained from different initial points and using different optimization algorithms will end up in different regions being activated, right? So, okay, that difference is definitely there, but I'm saying that this kind of analysis can be done for a neural network as well. So now the question is, what is the theme? What is the topic of today's talk? What drives the neural network? What is? I think I can ask this question to you. You can write on the chat window that what is driving the neural network. So you can. I will just open the chat window. You can write in the chat window. Please write in the chat window. This is a very simple question from those who have studied machine learning. So, what is driving the neural network? So, forget about the brain for some time. Just focus on this one question. what drives the neural network. As you saw, neural network has a particular response in different to different stimuli. So what has driven the neural network into that state? Okay, Sumit is saying input and activations. Yes, uh, the inputs were there, that cat and dog pictures it saw, and it got different activations. But the question is, why did it activate in that way? So Saurabh is saying data. Yes, I think you are very good, very close. Data, what kind of data? Is it the cats and dogs which it is seeing or something else? Okay. Okay, so Saurabh can elaborate what kind of data. Okay, okay, I will just tell. This is very subtle point. I think you have to think really deep. Uh, yes, cats and dogs are in when the network is after it has learned, then yes, it is it gets activated based on the different inputs. But uh, what has driven the network into this state that it is responding to cats and dogs in this way? What has driven the network into this state where it is able to respond to cats and dogs in this way? Okay, so yeah, so let us say the architecture of the network, the circuitry of the network and laws of physics, like there are many electronic circuits which have given rise to which is kind of driving the network. The electric power, of course, if the current goes off, then networks won't work. But okay, let's come to forget the hardware part or the actualization part, but come to um, the what do you say the conceptual part. So it's the learning which drives the network, right? It gets, as Saurabh mentioned, it gets refined. So which means it is learning, right? You are training the network. That is why it is able to respond. If some network is just random weights, right, then it will not respond in any meaningful way, or yeah, it won't respond in any consistent way, right? Different cats will lead to different activations, different dogs will lead to different activations, and it will have no consistency. It is just um, not correlated with anything. So, but when you train the network, then that is driving the network into that particular state where it is able to function in a very useful way, right? Now the question is, what is driving the learning? The learning is the learning kind of self-sufficient, or what is driving the learning? So as Saurabh mentioned, the data, yes, there is a learning algorithm which is driving, there is gradient descent algorithm which is driving the learning and pushing the weights in a particular direction. Now the question is, what is driving the learning algorithm? Then that is the objective function. Yes, so it's the objective function of the network which is actually driving the network. The training is driven by objective function. You define, that is why whenever I kind of teach neural networks or machine learning, I give a lot of focus on objective function, that how do you design your objective function, that is so important. So just like I think we have done long discussions on cross entropy loss function, binary cross entropy, categorical cross entropy loss function, and then what is it called, the uh, uh, RMSE, root means, or the mean squared error loss function, and hinge loss function. So many objective functions. So that is what is driving the learning algorithm. Now the question is, okay, who drives or what drives the objective function? What is driving the objective function? Answer is a human engineer makes it. So the network is functioning in this way because we designed the objective function, and so a human engineer makes it, right? So I think uh, Adhiraj is asking, wasn't it supposed to start at 9? No, it was supposed to start at 8, 8 to 9. That's what we do every um, Sunday evening. Today we started at 7:30, 7:30 to 9. Okay, so who drives the objective function? The objective function is driven by or designed by, is made by a human engineer. And it is very important to make your objective function correct. So I will tell you some experience. I was doing speech recognition. It was my initial days. I got introduced to this, means where I had to actually code it and make the network work in that way. So I was doing it in Python, and I thought I will do it everything uh, using some machine learning library, like let's say Keras or something. And so when I made it, the speech recognition system, I trained it from the data. I had the data, everything. I trained it, but it didn't give good results. So what was the reason? And I was like, for so many days, I was struggling and not able to find out why the network is not giving any good results. It is not able to learn. And finally, I found out that the objective function which I was using was wrong. I was using mean squared error function, but it is not good enough to drive my weights for this classification problem, multi-class classification problem. So I had to change it to categorical cross entropy. And as soon as I did that, it was working perfect. So the weights are driven by the objective function, and we are driving the objective function. Uh, so so this is okay. Now I met one researcher in San Diego. I told him this point that, see, we are giving the data, we are giving the objective function, we are designing the objective function. Let us say it's a RMSE, root mean squared error loss, or mean squared error loss. So it means I am telling this is the desired value, and this is the what do you say, the estimated or predicted value, right? And you try to minimize the error. So this desired value is given by me, right? And similarly, in multi-class classification problem, the class is told by me, this is dog and this is cat, and all the images, and this image is cat, this image is cat, this image is dog, this image is dog. And then you give the prediction, and then you minimize the difference between what is predicted and what is the ground truth. So we are supplying the ground truth, we are supplying the data, we are designing the objective function. So we are the network is ultimately we are driving it. So there was a very interesting researcher. He told me, he said, no, what about Bayesian learning? In Bayesian learning, there is no labeled data, it is all unlabeled data. uh, then I was really, I thought, this is really intelligent person. There is no learning algorithm in Bayesian learning, means there is no gradient descent or something. You just have a simple Bayesian law of what is it, uh, uh, prior and posterior functions, and then it just learns from there. He said there is no objective function in the Bayesian learning. And I was really, oh no, this person is really very intelligent. And then I understood, okay, yes, even if there is no objective function there, that learning algorithm itself, it is based on the data. And if it is supervised learning, then the data is supplied by a human being, right? When you say the posterior probability of y given x, there the desired y is given by a human being, right? And then next question could be asked, what about unsupervised learning, where there is no uh, it is not well, but what about unsupervised learning? Then the answer is, okay, it is unsupervised learning is just clustering the data or finding some correlations in the data, but who is driving the objective function? uh, so means in this case, the it is just finding some correlations in the data, and it may be meaningless. For example, if you see a cat is sitting like this and a dog also sitting like this, but a cat is doing this and dog is also doing this, then they will rather form clusters. The clusters will not be about cats or dogs, it will be about their orientation, right? So that kind of learning may not give you that meaningful response which you are looking for. Then somebody may ask, what about reinforcement learning? Nobody provides labels there, right? In reinforcement learning, uh, Then in the reinforcement learning, the the whole thing is driven by the reward function, right? And similarly, in genetic algorithms, the whole thing is driven by the fitness function. So you see, like I think this will also burst some myths that neural networks will outperform humans, or they will become so powerful that they will uh, become more intelligent than humans. So, but I'm telling that even in the state of the art research, uh, then in the neural network also, the whole thing is driven by us, the engineers who are designing the objective function or the training algorithm or the reward function or the fitness function, right? Okay, now let's come back to our original question about consciousness. So, what is the objective function for the neural processes? Now, just come back to the previous topic, previous discussion, that we have a brain, and brain is showing correlations, it is showing activities in different regions, right? Then uh, what is so if you say just showing some responses, or if that is only consciousness, then no, that is not proper approach. What is the objective function for the neural processes? So what is driving the neural processes? So I will quote this verse from Bhagavatam. Okay, I'm just trying to say this is one question which had come that uh, uh, okay. So far we have been studying. Okay, let me now try to summarize what we discussed. So far we saw some perspectives which say that consciousness is an epiphenomena, or consciousness is generated because of some neuronal activities in the brain, right? Some, when brain is acting in certain way, then consciousness is uh, generated. Uh, but then the question will be asked why the brain is acting in that way, right? If you say brain is um generating consciousness, and brain itself is made up of neurons, and neurons are made up of different uh, different chemicals, like some different fluids, some different uh, uh, um, some different matter like carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, etc. Then the question is, what is driving these neural processes? That question is not answered. Why the brain has to be uh, has to behave in certain way? Why the brain has to respond in a certain way? That question is not answered in this paradigm. So let us see, can we find a perspective from where we can try to study this aspect? So this is this perspective comes from Shrimad Bhagavatam, which is a very different perspective. It says that brain is not the driver, but brain is not the cause of consciousness, but the brain is driven. So I will read this statement. The brain is nothing but matter. Okay, yes, that we all agree that brain is nothing but matter. Brain is made up of neurons, and neurons are made up of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and so many other um, um, hemoglobin, oxygen, so many other things. But when electrified by the energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the brain can act just as iron can burn when made red hot by the influence of fire. The brain can act while we are awake or even while we are dreaming. But when we are fast asleep or unconscious, the brain is inactive. Since the brain is a lump of matter, it does not have independent power with which to act. I think this is a very important line. This is a very important perspective that, okay, the brain, if you see, it has a uh, just like compare it with neural network. Neural network is just a kind of neurons, right? And it is just random weights. They have no independent power to act. If you let them just act on their own, what will they do, right? They will just show some random activity or nothing. Similarly, the if you get some bolts and nuts and just leave them as it is, so what will they do? They will just keep lying as it is, like Newton's first law, right? Newton's first law says something which is in rest, it will stay in the state of rest, and something which is moving stay in the state of moving, that with constant velocity. Similarly, the means matter, or the lump of matter, whether it is carbon, hydrogen, or oxygen, or a combination of them. So fundamentally, it has no independent power with which to act, right? So the brain is just kind of dead matter. It has no power to act. But now we don't observe a dead brain. We see brain is active, brain is showing responses. Then immediately the question will be asked, then this means brain is not the driver, brain is driven from this perspective. Now what is driving the brain then? So now the this is perspective from Bhagavatam, that now see, this is a completely opposite perspective, that brain is not the driver, but consciousness is the driver and brain is driven. So I will read this as it is. The conclusion is that the particular consciousness of of an individual soul, um, it is the particular consciousness of an individual soul which acts. The brain substance is only an instrument which has nothing to do with real intelligence. So our brain is an instrument which is acting, and what is driving it? The particular consciousness. The consciousness is driving the brain. So see, this perspective is a very different perspective, and it has its own utility. It has a great utility as well. So the previous perspective was brain is giving rise to or driving the consciousness. That had one utility, and this has another utility. I will kind of reconcile the two, that how brain becomes a driver of consciousness. But let me discuss it now itself. So earlier we saw the kind of consciousness which was talked about in that article. In that article was that consciousness of our sensual experiences and consciousness of our mental activity. So if you remember from the previous last week's discussion, that we saw consciousness could be consciousness, the material consciousness, or the real consciousness, the pure consciousness. The material consciousness is affected by matter or affected by external stimuli. So when you show somebody you want to play tennis, then immediately the consciousness is affected. That is the material consciousness. But the pure consciousness is not affected by that. So, and that pure consciousness uh, is the is the original thing. So brain is just an instrument which has nothing to do with the real intelligence or the real driving force. Like what I mean to say is, mm, brain is not making you what you are. You are shaping your brain. I hope that makes sense. You are shaping your brain. If your brain is in certain way, then you have shaped it. It's not that the brain is uh, shaping your consciousness. Of course, brain is has a vital role, but its role is like that of an instrument with which you are performing some actions, but you are shaping that instrument. Okay, so the brain substance is not the center of intelligence. It is a consciousness of a particular soul that works intelligently. Basically, it's the consciousness that is working intelligently. The whole movement of Krishna consciousness is to purify the consciousness. Okay, so this is the utility of this perspective, that if you want to shape your life, change your consciousness will automatically change your brain. So brain is not the root, brain is not the main driver, the causal force. Rather, it's the consciousness which is the causal factor, which is driving the thing. So if you want to control things, uh, you have to uh, you have to work on the consciousness. This is a very important perspective. So now let's zoom out a bit. So earlier we saw that our brain so if let's say somebody gets some sickness or some disorder, then what will the doctor do? If they stick by if they go by the first model, they will do some manipulation on the brain, some chemicals, some medicines which will alter the brain in certain way, and they will assume that the consciousness will change. But in this perspective, you change your consciousness instead of um, basically try to purify our consciousness. From contaminated consciousness, go to pure consciousness, and then you automatically your neuronal responses will change, your um, uh, experiences will change. So a very different perspective, but it has its own utility, and it has a very deeper connotation. Okay, now what is the role of God? What is the role of Krishna? Okay, so because I told in the last discussion that there are two kinds of consciousness. One is the individual consciousness, the other is the supreme consciousness. Supreme consciousness means uh, which we can call as Krishna, we can call it absolute truth. So that is the absolute consciousness and the individual consciousness, which could be further of two types, pure or contaminated. So in the pure or contaminated consciousness is our, which we call as jiva in the last discussion we studied. And then Krishna is the Ishvara, or the supreme consciousness. So this is from Bhagavad Gita. It says, the Supreme Lord is situated in everyone's heart, O Arjuna, and is directing the wanderings of all the living entities who are seated as on a machine made of the material energy. So see here, the body or the brain is compared to a machine which is made up of matter, and then the living entity is seated in that machine. And what is the role of Krishna? Krishna is situated in everyone's heart, and he is the okay. The individual or the jiva is not all in all. The supreme personality of Godhead, or he himself, Krishna, as a localized super soul, sits in the heart, directing the living being. So the Krishna is the supreme Lord, the supreme absolute consciousness. That is why it is called absolute, right? We saw in the last discussion, absolute means kshetra, kshetrajna, that the absolute consciousness is conscious of everything, everybody, but the individual consciousness or jiva is conscious only of my own body. That's it. I don't know what is going on beyond my body, but Krishna, as the supreme absolute consciousness, he's aware of everybody, everything. And how he's aware? Because he is seated in everybody as Paramatma, super soul. So the exact verse from Bhagavad Gita, it says, um, Ishwaram Sarva Bhutanam Hriddeshi Arjuna Tishtati Brahmayan Sarva Bhutani Yantarudani Mayaya. So that is the verse. Okay. Another this analogy is will make further clear this perspective that a person seated in a high-speed motor car goes faster than one seated in a slower car. So now uh, we experience different people are, for example, somebody whose brain is somebody gets a brain injury, right? And they become dysfunctional. They're not able to play tennis, or they're not able to speak. So some functionality they may lose. On the other hand, somebody is a healthy brain, he can act in a normal way or in a healthy way. So the different, why this difference is there? So somebody can say, no, the brain has in that consciousness is not possible in that brain or something like that. But the, from that perspective, it was that reasoning. But from this perspective, it says the brain is as an instrument has become hindered. So just like somebody is in a high-speed motor car, he moves faster. But somebody, when the same person can sit in the slower car, like an old ambassador, he will go slower, right? So the living entities, the drivers may be the same. So so when we say living entity, when we say consciousness, you can see them as synonyms. So the consciousness may be the same, the same spirit soul, the living entity, but depending on different brains, you are able to perform certain actions in um, uh, better or worse ways. Similarly, by the order of the Supreme Lord, material nature fashions a particular type of body to a particular type of living entity so that he may work according to his past desires. Okay, now what is the role of Krishna? So Krishna is directing, he is guiding, ordering the material nature to give a particular kind of brain or body to us. Somebody has got some kind of brain, somebody's got some kind of brain. So that is made according to our past desires or our past consciousness, but that whole thing is actuated by the supreme soul, the Paramatma. So yes, I am responsible for it because my consciousness is leading to that kind of brain, but Krishna is just facilitating. He's not interfering with our decisions, or he's not interfering with our it means our choice. We have the choice, but so I hope this point is clear that brain is the instrument and consciousness is kind of driving that instrument, and how it is driving, depending on that, the brain is formed. And not just in one life, but life after life, we are designing, we are kind of responsible for what brain I get. So this is the perspective. Okay, so this is from Bhagavad Gita, 18th chapter, 61st verse. Okay, so I think I can stop here. This was it. So we discussed uh, many perspectives. So primarily, it can be classified into two perspectives. In one perspective, brain is the driver and consciousness is the uh, uh, is a emergence from that. Uh, this perspective is not wrong, as I told that in the previous discussion we discussed that this perspective is a very meaningful perspective, and the why this perspective is there because our uh, awareness is dependent on the brain in certain way because our material consciousness or our consciousness of sensual experiences and consciousness of our mental activities is uh, intermediated by the brain, or brain is the instrument to do that. So studying those correlations is very useful. As you can see, modern science, neuroscience is making lots of advancements because of this connection. But then this perspective from Bhagavad Gita, which says brain as the instrument and consciousness as a driver of that instrument, this has its own utility, and actually it has much deeper utility. And as we can see, many questions are being answered here. And uh, the uh, I think there is a lot of scope of doing neuroscience from this perspective, that how our consciousness is driving the brain processes. And yeah, I think with that I can end my discussion. You can ask questions now. There are some questions on the chat window. I will just read. Where does the consciousness reside? Okay, good question. So as we saw, how what is the signature of consciousness? Signature of consciousness is, okay, consciousness is of different levels. One is the consciousness about my sensual experiences. Where is it residing in? It is residing in the senses, right? That is why we are aware of the senses. And then consciousness of mental experiences. Where does it reside? It resides in the mind. And then the consciousness of our intelligence, that I am doing some good conceptual work and driving our intelligence in particular way, so that in consciousness is residing in the is pervading in the brain, in the sorry, in the intelligence. uh, and then consciousness of so many things, right? So our consciousness is there, is pervading in all those things. But now what is the seat of consciousness? That is the, we call it conceptually as spirit soul, which means the basic uh, driver, or the basic uh, cause of consciousness, the living, that is the spirit soul. And where is it residing? There are different perspectives. There can be different perspectives on that as well. So, for example, as we see here, that it is in the heart region, right? But then heart also is an experience, right? What kind of experience is it? How do you know where is your heart? Heart is also an experience, right? What kind of experience is this? Maybe a visual experience. I can see with my eyes, or there's something maybe here, the heart is there. It could be a touch experience. I'm touching it. Oh, this is my heart. It's a touch experience. So, but where is this experience? This is also,
Is it emotion?
no, it is not emotion. Intelligence and emotion are not same, right?
Hmm.
It's an experience, but not emotion. Emotion is one kind of experience, right? Intelligence could be another kind of experience, and um, uh, um, they could be interrelated also. Some kind of experience, some sensual experience may evoke certain kind of emotion. They may be correlated, but still they are different, right? Okay, so the thing is, where is the consciousness residing? So that basic factor which is causing the consciousness, that is called the spirit soul, as per Bhagavatam or Bhagavad Gita. um, and then it is pervading all over its field. For example, the senses or the mind or intelligence, it is pervading everywhere. And then Adhiraj is a question: are we immortal? Like, so yes, the pure consciousness is immortal, right? We discussed in the last class that the pure consciousness cannot be altered, or it cannot. We discussed from Bhagavad Gita that nasato vidite bhavo na bhavo vidite satha. So the definition of pure consciousness as per Bhagavad Gita is that it is unchanging. Uh, uh, Yeah, so that is it. I think we can stop here. If you have any more questions, feel free to ask. If you wish, I can turn off the recording so that you can